the idol of gold. When you think of gold, what do you think of? Matter, physicality, a gleaming symbol of material wealth. We imagine coins, jewelry, luxury, objects of desire and preeminence. But Judaism invites us to think more deeply and more dangerously. Because in Torah, gold is not just a precious metal. It is a spiritual metaphor. More than that, it is an idol. We are commanded not merely to avoid worshiping it, but to destroy it. Why such severity? Why is gold not just a currency, but as a concept treated with such spiritual suspicion? To answer that, we must journey into one of the most subtle and profound tensions in all of Jewish thought, the paradox of idolatry. Do idols exist? At first, the Torah's response seems unambiguous. They do not. They have mouths but cannot speak, eyes but cannot see. Idols are emptiness, falsehood, fabrications of human hands and human fears. They are nothing. But then, a surprise. The deeper you study, the more you discover that something does exist. There are spiritual forces in creation. Mazal, celestial bodies, angels, energies that exert influence over the world, not independent powers, but channels through which divine abundance flows. And now the contradiction emerges. If these forces exist, and if they truly influence our world, then what exactly is false about idolatry? Yes, the forces exist, but they are not autonomous. They are not worthy of worship. They are creations, not creators. Instruments, not composers. Ministers, not the king. As the Rambam explains, the earliest idolaters didn't reject God. On the contrary, they sought to honor him by respecting his servants, the stars, the planets, the forces of nature. But what began as reverence soon evolved into ritual and then into worship. The forms they carved weren't believed to be gods, but they represented powers they hoped to please, influences they wished to indulge in. Thus, idolatry was born, not out of rebellion, but out of confusion. Idolatry, in its most sophisticated form, is spiritual immaturity. God created a world in which celestial influence is seemingly real. Astrology, mazal, spiritual wiring, they are part of the divine architecture. And yes, in some cases, these energies can be and have been manipulated through rituals, sacrifices, or spiritual techniques such as witchcraft. But here lies the divine challenge. To see a world in which it is perceivable upon first impression that it works, but to acknowledge that it is not true. You see, there is a difference between real and true. Since idol worship is against the will of Hashem, it is therefore not true. That doesn't mean that's not how the system is built. It may very well be the hardware of our solar system. But we are expected to mature and recognize that the software of the system is what really matters. The spiritual realm in which we serve only the unity of Hashem is the desired evolution and ultimate trajectory of the whole universe, Jews and Gentiles alike. This is theological maturity. Even Avraham Avinu, the father of faith, began as an idol worshiper. In fact, the Haggadah makes it explicit. In the beginning, our ancestors were idolaters. This is not just a historical record. It is a lesson which teaches that life on earth is designed as a spiritual roadmap. Abraham's greatness was not that he was born with perfect knowledge of God. It was that he matured out of confusion into clarity. He taught that faith is a journey, and the highest form of worship is not fear of forces, but intimacy with the infinite. Idolatry may be a predictable human response to cosmic influence, but it is not our destiny. Hashem is calling us not through intermediaries, not through bargaining with spiritual forces, but by walking with Him, speaking to Him, becoming like Him. That is why the Torah demands that we burn the idols, not because they are real or unreal, but because they are less than what we're called to be. As we grow in our understanding of idolatry, we must refine our vision even further, because not all idolatry looks the same. Some forms are clothed in ritual, others in doctrine. And so Jewish thought makes a crucial distinction. There is practical idolatry and there is theological idolatry. Practical idolatry, this is the more familiar version. It is what we read about in Tanakh, the worship of Baal, Molech, Asherah trees. It is the carving of statues, the building of altars, the offering of incense and sacrifices to celestial bodies. It is rooted in human anxiety and the desperate desire for control. If rain is scarce, offer a sacrifice. If war is coming, appease the God of battle. The practical idolater does not reject God outright. He simply doesn't trust that God is close or attentive, so he turns to intermediaries, forces he believes will respond to service, flattery, or ritual. This kind of idolatry is about transaction. I give, I get. It is power-seeking disguised as worship. But there is another kind, quieter, more philosophical, and in many ways, even more dangerous. This is theological idolatry. Not a ritual practice, but a belief system, a distortion not of how we serve, but of what we think God is. Take, for example, Christianity. Its core idea is not that there are many gods in competition, but it presents God not as singular, not as indivisible. This is not practical idolatry, but theological dualism, a theological misunderstanding of God's oneness. For Judaism, this is no small error. It goes to the very heart of faith. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. This is not a poetic line, it is the foundation of all spiritual life. Theological idolatry offers ideas. It builds cathedrals of thought. But if those ideas divide the divine, if they insert intermediaries between man and God, they too are a form of avodah zarah. Once we've grasped the distinction between practical and theological idolatry, we are better equipped to understand the true depth of the Torah's concern with materialism. We begin to sense the deeper layers of the Torah's language. Because when the Torah speaks of gold, of wealth, luxury, material attainment, it does not refer to it merely as a temptation or test. It calls it something far more severe. It calls it an idol. And this raises a deeper, more difficult question, one we must pause to consider. Why does the Torah choose to diagnose the pursuit of material wealth not just as a distraction, not just as excess, but as idolatry? Why insist on framing it not psychologically, socially, or ethically, but theologically? Why is gold not just simply described as a temptation of the body, but as an object of false worship? Here is the enduring truth. You cannot heal what you refuse to name. And you cannot name it if you do not understand what it really is. In medicine, the wrong diagnosis leads to the wrong prescription. A doctor who treats a serious disease as a mild rash will never reach for the right tools. And so too in spiritual life. If we misdiagnose materialism as mere preference, a lifestyle choice, or a psychological tendency, then every solution we propose will be too soft, too small, too shallow. If you treat anger, for example, purely as a behavioral glitch, something to be managed through mindfulness or strategic withdrawal, you may reduce its flare-ups, but you will never transform it. This is the limitation of secular or atheist morality. It is often deeply invested in behavior, but blind to the being behind the behavior. It offers management techniques without meaning. It aims to control symptoms without ever confronting the soul. A psychologist may say, take a deep breath, walk away, distract yourself. But the Torah says, name the fire, the anger, the avodah zarah that anger is, and then proceed to control it instead of it controlling you. Because transformation comes not from management, but from understanding. And understanding only comes when we see the problem for what it truly is. So when you call materialism by its name, avodah zarah, idol worship, you begin to see it in its full spiritual dimensions. Not just a temptation, but a form of devotion. Not just physical, but theological. Not just harmless desire, but something that competes with God for your loyalty. A workaholic could only heal when he recognizes that he worships gold. That he sacrificed time to study Torah, time to spend with the wife and kids. If you wear fake brand names, you need to confess that you are not a pro at self-development. If you had been, you would be serving Hashem and feel plenty self-worth that the entire subject of brand names would not only be laughable to you, but even degrading. You realize the idol has its own recruitment agenda. What's not on its agenda is your good. It offers safety, but it actually provides more worries. It sells satisfaction, but it actually provides the lack of satisfaction. We've already mentioned that nobody expects a child to be born with theological maturity. Spiritual wisdom, like all things human, is acquired through error, through experience, and through honest confrontation with reality. It is natural, even necessary, for a young person to find dignity in garments, in brands. Later in life, it is often in titles, wealth, or admiration. But if real growth takes place, if the soul is open and honest, then eventually it comes to a deeper truth. It understands that dignity is not conferred by others. It is rooted in one's connection to God and expressed through how one conducts themselves with others. This is not just a psychological process. It is a spiritual pattern that the Torah itself lays before us again and again. God did not create a perfect world. He created a world full of idol worship. He places Paro on the throne, the embodiment of power, luxury, and celestial knowledge. He allows Paro to dazzle. He lets him rule. He surrounds him with gold, astrologers, sorcerers, and apparently, he's self-sufficient. So much so that Paro can say without hesitation, I do not know the Lord. And then, Hashem descends. Not to whisper, but to shatter. to show in the most dramatic fashion ever witnessed that everything that appears independent of God is in fact an illusion. It is a theological demonstration. Yetziat Mitzrayim. He says, you see this? This is what an idol looks like. Now watch me destroy it. This then is not just a moment in history, but is the blueprint for the spiritual life of a Jew. So in childhood, we are told these are just pieces of wood, stone, lifeless, powerless, meaningless, ancient nonsense. And ultimately, that's true. And at this early stage, we are protected by simplicity. But this rejection is shallow. As we grow, the world deepens. We begin to learn about spiritual forces, mazal, celestial influence, hidden systems that shape reality. We hear whispers of ancient wisdom, of energies that seem to function, to affect, to work. Suddenly, the idea of idolatry doesn't seem so foolish. In fact, it starts to make sense. Perhaps those who worshipped stars weren't fools. Perhaps they saw something real. And they did. But here lies the danger. Real does not mean true. You see, when the soul continues to seek, it reaches the next stage. It can look directly at the structure of the universe, its energy, its influence, its spiritual machinery, and still say, I will not bow to you. Not because you are imaginary, but because you are not God. Even if something works, it doesn't mean it's right. Even if it gives, it doesn't mean it is good. Because truth is not measured by results. Truth is measured by its alignment with the will of the Creator. This is what the Torah means when it commands us to destroy the idols. Now that we've established the spiritual dangers of worshiping gold and its uncanny resemblance to the golden calf and the charging bull of Wall Street, we are left with a critical question, perhaps the most important one yet. If gold is so spiritually hazardous, then why did Hashem create it at all? Well, to dismiss gold entirely would be to misunderstand both Hashem and Torah. Because gold intrinsically is not evil. It appears not only in the context of sin, but in the holiest spaces of Jewish life. Even the Ark of the Covenant was made with gold. The question is not whether gold is powerful. It is. The question is whether you are more powerful than it. By the way, this very question is posed by the Gemara in Avodah Zarah. If God despises idolatry, then why does he not destroy the sun, moon, and stars, those very things that people bow to? The answer, because they serve a purpose. Just because some foolish people bow to the sun does not mean the sun has no purpose. It warms the earth, it nourishes crops, it sustains life. It also carries lofty metaphysical properties and sings to Hashem. So the problem lies not in the object, but in the human projection onto it. And so Hashem does not simply destroy his creation because it is misused. So too with gold. The fact that some people kneel before the idol of gold does not mean gold itself must be banished. Instead, we are called to restore it to its true purpose. But just what is that purpose? So many people would answer this question with a one-liner. Use the money for good, and then the money is good. That is way too simplistic and myopic. In the next video, B'ezrat Hashem, we will discuss the true purpose of gold. How to harness gold properly to fulfill the will of Hashem. Thank you, everybody.